you and welcome back to our second plenary session. We're so glad you're still here with us, and we hope you have enjoyed the breakout sessions and are continuing to connect. We have got over 2,000 attendees who have not only registered, but who are present here with us throughout the day, and how exciting it's been. I'm seeing many of you connecting with each other, and that is definitely what this is all about, introducing yourselves to each other, what you do, where you come from, and some of you expressing interest to work with each other. That is what this is all about. Remember to follow the hashtag Global Goals Local Business. And it's a united Africa that we want, and that is what we're discussing here today. Forecasting over the next 10 years, taking a look at what the continent will look like, even as we get into that critical decade of action leading up to the deadline of 2030, when we said we want to have achieved the ambitious yet attainable and achievable sustainable development goals. And here we're focusing on the continent of Africa, and so many great things we have heard today. So let me just give you a quick recap of what we've had throughout the morning session for those of you who are in this part of the continent. And for our first session, well, we've heard from leaders, African leaders in business, in government, at the UN, on the importance of building partnerships. We've also heard about the role of young people and what they're doing, as well as the private sector and what some of their responses and strategies must be, especially driving towards sustainability, particularly during a tough time like this, which is a pandemic. And speaking of a pandemic, we all know that the MSME sector, that's the micro, small, and medium enterprises, have been disproportionately affected during this time. And one of the challenges around why they have been so severely affected is because of the informality in which they exist. And yet the MSME sector is huge for the continent's employment and economic development in countries like Kenya, providing over half of the jobs in the entire country. And so to support the MSME sector, UN Global Compact, together with ICC and UNDP, have teamed up to create what is known as the COVID-19 Private Sector Global Facility. For more on this facility now and the sustainability journey for the players in the MSME sector, let me now hand you over to Valentina Minter, who's the Vice Chair of the ICC in Ghana, and she will be taking you through this next conversation and introducing her panelists. Valentina, over to you.
Thank you, Yvonne. And good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. It is indeed a real honor and privilege for me to give remarks and also moderate this panel on the sustainability journey of SMEs in the African context. SMEs account for more than 90% of all businesses in many countries, with a large share of these being classed as micro firms who have fewer than 10 employees. While they may be small individually, ILO data shows that MSMEs are responsible for a staggering 70% of employment globally. Further, more than 60% of the world's employed population are in the informal economy, with a 66% representation in sub-Saharan Africa. MSMEs are therefore critical in driving innovation and competition, income generation, and economic growth. In Africa, we cannot overlook the additional pivotal role SME owners play, with being at the helm of affairs of their families and also their local communities, the very fabric of the socio-economic security of the continent. Never in our lifetime have we endured the kind of socio-economic disruption the world is currently experiencing, as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to cause massive economic displacement across the globe. Whereas the predicted doom projections on the spread of the virus in Africa and its impact, thankfully, seems to have largely been averted, there still remains the task of mitigating the economic consequences of the virus on the continent. From all indications, the economic impact of COVID-19, as Yvonne mentioned earlier, has disproportionately hit SMEs, particularly in the informal economy in Africa, where 325 million workers make their living. SMEs are more vulnerable to the disruption of business networks and supply chains than larger corporations. These are in no small measure due to challenges with liquidity and access to finance, combined with a lack of know-how or connections to access government or institutional-led stimulus programs. COVID-19 has presented new risks and compounded existing risks for SMEs, and there's an urgent need to enhance recovery efforts for a more sustainable and resilient future. From a sustainable development perspective, it is necessary to safeguard SMEs as they play a critical role in the economic growth of most developing nations and the fight against inequality via redistribution. In the aftermath of this virus, the world as we've known it has changed permanently and also forced a review of many existing private and even government models that we took for granted. The pandemic has taught us one big lesson, that we're only as strong as our weakest link. And therefore, collaboration at all levels, private to private, private to government, and government to government is critically needed. The COVID-19 reset button, where all economies are reshaping their strategies, is a call to action for government and private sector alike. With the operationalization of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, AFCFTA, which is the world's largest free trade area since the creation of the WTO in 1994, set for January 1st, less than a month away, January 1st, 2021. Africa must seize the opportunity to align post-COVID and AFCFTA strategies to recover better together, while empowering and building the capacity of SMEs to contribute to the advancement of economic and social progress of Africa's intra-regional trading and also with its trading partners, providing the necessary tools, advocacy, and resources to assure the voice of African SMEs in policy setting, investment, sustainability, and trade multilateral negotiations. The mantra, think local and know global, has never been more relevant. In response to the post-COVID recovery strategies, many governments, development agencies, banks, and multinationals have announced unprecedented measures to support SMEs survive throughout the economic fallout and provide the foundation for a stronger recovery after the crisis. Some examples of these are the United Nations Global Compact Special Appeal, Uniting Business. This appeal calls for special attention to SMEs, encouraging larger companies to respond with flexibility, integrity, and solidarity to the impact on SMEs and to preserve their contracts, operations, and workforce across their global supply chains. There's also the private sector COVID-19 Global Facility, which is a joint initiative of UNDP, ICC, and the UN Global Compact, operating both at global and national levels with an aim to co-create solutions tailored to both the phase of the pandemic and the specificities of the local private sector and governments. And at ICC, the institutional representative of over 45 million companies. Our mission is to make business work for everyone, every day, everywhere. To harness the opportunities presented, we initiated the SOS, a call to action to save our SMEs campaign, targeted at governments, multilateral institutions, and business leaders to cooperate and coordinate their responses to ensure that immediate stimulus efforts flow to the most vulnerable to the economic disruptions caused by the pandemic, as well as to ensure that multinational corporations showcase principled corporate leadership across global supply chains. Ladies and gentlemen, we're very privileged today to be joined on this panel by two distinguished practitioners from business, finance, and international organizations who will shine the spotlight on the impact of COVID-19 on African SMEs and their employees, examine effective policy and physical responses currently available to SMEs in Africa, and also practical solutions needed at the local, national, and global levels to help SMEs recover better, stronger, and together. We'll also look at SMEs' involvement in SDG implementation. Our aim is to have an interactive session as virtually possible. So our audience, kindly type in any questions you may have on the chat for the question and answer session, which will be at the end of the panel discussion. And also, please don't forget to include the name of the panelist you'd like your question directed at. Our first panelist today is Ms. Catherine Kimario. She's the Chief Strategy Advisor of the Eastern and Southern African Trade and Development Bank, TDB. And prior to her appointment as advisor, Ms. Kimario was the director of the TDB Nairobi Regional Office, responsible for projects and infrastructure finance. Before joining TDB, she was a senior investment officer at the World Bank and held roles at the UN in Kosovo and Akiba Commercial Bank in Tanzania. Ms. Kimario possesses over 20 years of experience in project and corporate finance and also deal structuring. Welcome, Catherine. So I'll go to Catherine, and my first question, I'll go straight into the question for Catherine. Catherine, access to finance and development support has been the recurring theme in almost all recent discussions with SMEs. As a development bank, is TD Bank or any other bank providing concrete ongoing assistance to SMEs in Africa to cushion the effect of COVID-19? And can you provide pointers on where and how SMEs can access these? Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Valentina, and thank you all. Happy to be with you here today. As I begin to answer that question, I think it's important, given that we've been told there are over 2,000 participants, to lay the ground for people to understand what type of financing is available. So there's a whole spectrum of financing available, from debt financing to equity financing, where investors will actually take shares in your companies. And I raise this because many times as SMEs, that thought of tapping equity finance is not top of mind. So it's just good to know that there is that whole spectrum. And just as there's a spectrum in terms of the type of financing that can come in, there's also a spectrum of the type of financiers. So everything from commercially minded financiers who are looking for commercial returns, and so will price accordingly, whether it is on the debt side, getting loans at what are commonly referred to as market rates, all the way to concessional, where it can be from grant types of funding to softer money, as it is called, right? Where the interest rate is a little bit lower. And so there is, in the recent past, we've seen a trend even of impact investors, people who are looking for sustainability as part of the return, not just financial return. So this is a long way to introduce the types of funding that are available. I just think it's important to help to broaden that perspective. So on the debt side, many of us are conversant with our local banks. We have international banks, but we also have development banks, as you mentioned. TDB, Trade and Development Bank, is a development bank. And as with other banks, we are looking to lend, but into sustainable operations, right? And that's key, that sustainability is key. And it's not just sustainability as a nice to have, but seeing sustainability as essential, financial sustainability as essential. So practically, what can people do? Where can we find information? Depends on the market that you're in. Obviously, we're covering quite a number of markets just in this event. As a development bank, TDB covers 20 odd markets. But I would say practically, if there are any SMEs with us today, is start with your local banks, ask what's available. Also reach out to your local ICC chapter and find out from the chambers of commerce what's going on. There are also, in many of our countries, there are investment centers that have been created to promote investment, and including for SMEs. So these are some of the practical places that we could go. Being mindful that we also have some bankers online with us. This is a great opportunity to raise awareness of what's available. And I'm not just calling out the bankers, but also other providers of financial instruments, such as insurance. Many SMEs do not take insurance, most times for lack of awareness. So there's a great opportunity for all of us to raise awareness and perhaps even raise capacity so that this funding becomes available to SMEs. I'll stop there for now.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. That's great for taking us through the finance types available as well as the financiers. And I think you raise a very key point in terms of insurance. That's most things that it tends to be an afterthought and after the event. But I think COVID and the pandemic has taught us that insurance is really important, and force majeure, which tends to be hidden clauses in contracts, is now even more important. So thank you for that. And at the end, if you can give us further details in terms of TDB itself, which type of organizations can access TDB or similar development banks. I think if we can understand the dynamics between development banks and commercial banks from the SME perspective, that would be great. But we'll pick that up at the end. So we'll move on to our next esteemed panelist, who is Mr. Joseph Dejimba. Mr. Dejimba wears multiple hats for our panel today. He is the managing director of Pharmagros Sal and Dejimba Sal, the first Congolese factory to specialize in the manufacturing of PET plastic packaging for use in fields as varied as pharmacy, food industry, and cosmetics. He's currently the vice president of the Professional Committee of Pharmaceutical Industrialists at the Congolese Enterprise Federation and VP of the National Commission of Small and Medium Enterprises. Mr. Dejimba also serves on the board as the vice chair for the UN Global Compact Network DRC. Welcome, Joseph. So we heard about some of the finance elements from Catherine, but coming down to you, we know your industry, pharmaceuticals, has been and continues to be one of the critical players in the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly for vulnerable populations and in light of the vaccine update, which is really positive, and we all look forward to the time when we can go back to near normal again. As an SME yourself, dedicated to the cause of Africa entrepreneurship, From a practitioner's worldview, what policy interventions from governments and development partners, including development banks, are needed, or trade banks, trade finance specialists, are needed to support small businesses and their workforce to thrive in order to also engage in the implementation of the sustainable development goals? Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you for having me. On this side of the world, this continent, Africa, we all know that also the government are going through hard times, especially now with this pandemic situation going on. So compared to maybe some developed country where we heard some astronomical figures, you know, helping those SMEs to survive this hard time. The African government may not have the same funds to put into the market, but they have different things that they can do to help. I give example of what's happening in the DRC right now, and I applaud the government for that, to help the SMEs. What the government has done is, for instance, I give some examples. They have eliminated some custom duties, especially in some sectors, some key sectors of life, that pharmaceutical, where I work, and the agriculture also. They eliminated altogether the custom duties to help those SMEs survive this hard time. With the funds that they could get, they also have, they've given some institution to help the SMEs, and they've given them an amount. And for those SMEs that are qualified to go and to get those funds are being given at 0% interest. So you can get those funds for those SMEs that are qualified. You get those funds at 0 interest. Not only that, but they are guaranteed by the government also. Because that's something happening to a lot of SMEs, is they're missing the guarantee to give to those institutions and get funds. But now the government is helping. They say, okay, you can go get those funds at 0 interest. Not only that, and we guarantee that for you. So that's something that the government of the DRC have done to help, and it's been working for us. Also, the Central Bank of the DRC, what I've done, you know, during this hard time, a lot of companies have having hard time repaying their loan to the bank. So what happened, they say you can negotiate with your commercial bank, and the commercial bank is, you know, they've waived, they say, okay, you cannot pay during this time. You can, you know, avoid making the payments, or you can pay later on, and again, without penalties. You know, this help a lot the SMEs to go through this hard time and continue trying to make, you know, going through this hard time, passing it. These measures all together and some more help a lot of SMEs to go through these times. And because of this pandemic situation, we have learned to work differently. You know, a lot of people have learned to work on teletravail, how you call it, working from site like we're doing right now. And we've been using data to do meetings or to talk to suppliers and different people that we need to continue our business. And for that, we use some data airtime, like what we call it. And what happened, and let we think, we are all together into this one. Some big corporates have decided to help the SMEs because during the normal time, when you don't respect and pay your due date, paying at paying on a regular basis, that you just get cut off. But those big corporates, what happened? They decided not to cut because the time has been hard to SMEs. So they say, you can work on using the data, and you will not get cut. And whenever things get better, you always can come back and have those, regularize your situation. So a lot of measures have been taken to help the SMEs. And, as we said on a regular basis, we are all in the same boat. No big corporates will survive without SMEs, and no SMEs will survive without big corporates. And the government needs to be there to regulate, make sure that everybody survives during this hard time. So basically it's been very good for the DRC, which is in the sub-Saharan Africa. And this situation, they've taken some good measures that can help the SMEs to survive during this hard time. Yeah.
That's excellent, Joseph. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's being innovative and knowing what our local issues are so that we can proffer the solutions that are needed. You mentioned that the governments they may be cash strapped, or they may not have the cash to be able to dole out to everyone, particularly with all the issues that are coming up. They may have been unbudgeted for. We also know about the oil prices, which are impacting government budgets. But innovation is what it is about. I mean, you've told us a little, I think a lot about some of the interventions that your government has put in place, looking at the 0% interest for qualified candidates, looking at the commercial banks being flexible with their terms. And then you also talk about the private sector, where the big corporations are looking at flexibility on enforcing the termination of phone lines because of non-payment of airtime. And I think we can all really relate to that. And that is what it is about. We need to look at African solutions for African problems and pull together to ensure that we all recover better and stronger together. Now, I'll ask a further question on that. I think we all need to look at lessons learned and ensure that post-COVID, we continue the momentum that we've gained in being able to come up with ideas that are solving our problems. In light or in view of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that's coming into force, where Africa will be seen as one regional body, these solutions that you've come up with in terms of DRC, what would you say will be the guiding principles to ensure that collectively we learn from each other? SMEs, as well as the governments, as well as the private sector. How can we ensure that these sort of interventions are not only local to DRC, if it is working, how can we share it across? And I think you're the voice of SMEs today. We have over 2,000 participants with us. So they would like to hear from you as a representative championing the cause. What do we need beyond DRC to make sure that we can recover better together, especially post-1st January, where we all now become a part of the biggest trade agreement area?
During the beginning of this pandemic, we've lost a lot. Like I was reading on the thing on the second quarter, I think we lost like 19% of our income, and then on the third quarters, we've lost maybe 5%. And nowadays, all of us in this panel, all the 2,000 people following us right now, everybody's involved in some way with the SMEs. So we cannot think of not helping the SMEs survive these difficult times. We need to make sure that the supply chain, the leader of the supply chain, continue to help those SMEs functioning. I'll give you one example. My example, I was during March, I was in some country, dealing with the planishing the next consignment to come into the DRC work. During my meetings, the government of that place decided to stop with the export of some raw material to the SMEs that we needed to function. And of course, what happened with this situation, it hits hard us and of course our customers also, okay? But move forward, 2 months after, they've changed that rule, they banned that rule, they said, no, we cannot not doing it because they needed us. So those big corporate, they need the SMEs to function. Like I said before, the SMEs also need those big corporate. And there's no time to play the protectionism during this hard time. Everybody needs to work as, we need to help each other. As our goal number 17, if I'm not mistaken, says the partnership to achieve goal. We need a partnership to achieve the goal that we all set to continue this one, to put our people into work, to make sure that they remain to work. The supply chains need to make sure that they continue giving us the product that we need to continue delivering and working, giving results to the market. We a lot of things can be done by the supply chain leaders to help them to remain into the market. Some credits may be given to SMEs because during this hard time, what happened, the supply leader may give credits to some SMEs. They say, okay, listen, we'll continue giving you your product to make sure that you continue your business, okay? But sometimes the SMEs also are needed by the big corporate to continue functioning. So those big corporate that need the services from the SMEs also need to get a little bit lenient, a little bit more lenient, not being tough on them. So if services can be delivered or something happened, instead of delivering the services on time, they deliver it a little bit late, don't put penalties on them because the times are tough for everybody. Just make sure that the service is done and you also succeed. So we are all in this together, as I said, and we need to make sure that we're helping each other to succeed and pass through this hard time with the help of the government authorities helping.
Excellent, thanks, Joseph. I think the message there is collaboration, 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 and we're really as strong as our weakest link. And it's a real call to action for government, institutions, as well as the voice of SMEs. I think what is key here is that SMEs must mobilize and let their needs be known so that together, yes, new solutions, innovative solutions, which we may have never practiced before, can be put into place. This is a time for us to all come together to look at new solutions, however ridiculous, it might be that very solution that would solve the problem. So thank you very much for that. And I think for all SMEs who are on the panel, for financiers who are on the panel, supply chain leaders, I think it's a call to action for all of us to ensure that we engage and we collaborate and we mobilize to ensure that we recover better together and take the opportunities that the pandemic has presented. Catherine, I'll come back to you. I'll come to you now. Joseph mentioned trade drops and the deficits that are currently being faced. Recent projections by UNTAD estimate that a 5% drop in world trade in the third quarter of there is a projected 5% drop in world trade in the third quarter of this 2020 compared to previous year 2019. It's an improvement from the 19% decline in the second quarter, but it's insufficient to pull trade out of the red. How do declines in international trade impact local SMEs? And what effect will permanent closures of small businesses have on the economic rebuild? And how do we mitigate, from a finance point of view, for example, how do we mitigate these doom statistics?
Thank you, Valentina, and thank you, Joseph, for highlighting the importance of cooperation. And that's what it comes down to, really. If you look at African SMEs, many of them are integrated in the global value chains, as even Joseph mentioned. And so any drop in global trade is going to have an impact on local SMEs. And how do we start to mitigate? If I take a step back, I can talk about how TDB has responded to COVID-19 with its clients and with its other stakeholders. And the response really has been, as with many of us, first and foremost, preserve life, but also preserve livelihood, because lives cannot be preserved if livelihoods are not. And this has been done at the very small scale, starting with our own staff, but also on the larger scale when we're looking at our clients. And TDB has both private sector and public sector clients. So it has corporations, companies as clients, but it also has sovereigns as clients. And if we link this into trade, for example, one of the first things we had to do was ensure that we proactively were working with our clients, reaching out to them, finding out what's the status, working with them to anticipate as much as anybody could anticipate, or even now can anticipate what the impact is going to be, and then finding solutions together. And you asked earlier, how do the likes of TDB and other banks work together? And it is about working together. Back in the day before COVID-19, we all used to love to say that we have what is called competition, right? We're not competing, we're working together, even though we may be in the same market. So it's a way of making sure that development banks such as TDB or development partners can provide long-term financing or take a higher risk. And then the local or national banks can provide shorter term financing, whether this is in terms of overdrafts or working capital. And so whether you're looking at a power plant or you're looking at a manufacturing plant, or even if you're looking at a hotel, all these operations require both short-term and long-term funding. So we do work together as financiers. And when we're looking and seeing that there is a decline in trade, and next step then is to refocus. So as TDB, we started with a short-term focus of make sure that we are sustaining economically and in terms of health. But then in the medium term is then starting to look ahead and refocus the business, but look ahead also with our clients. So what can SMEs do is really to refocus, look for opportunities regionally, look for opportunities locally. Many SMEs were able to find opportunities locally because of the closures of borders. All of a sudden, countries that had been very open now did not have access. Joseph alluded to this earlier as well. So yes, your core business may have had to change. We've all read the book, Who Moved My Cheese? And so the expression of the cheese moved. And so it's important to move with the cheese, or even move and find other cheese that nobody else has found. So refocusing is important, and there are opportunities for SMEs to have access to new markets. And these new markets can be local, they can be regional. There's also an opportunity to tap technology and the digital world to be able to find new markets as well. So whether those new markets are, could be a designer who used to work just locally, but now by being able to put their wares online, they can actually sell abroad. It could also be in terms of distribution, whereas restaurants, hotels may have focused on people coming to them. Now they bring their services to people. And it can even be innovating and sharing resources using technology. I recently heard of a service that allows farmers to share tractors. Because many farmers can't afford tractors on themselves. These are very smallholder farmers. So these are just examples to say we can create opportunities if we look for them and we're deliberate. And then also in terms of access to finance, many of us think of direct financing, but they can also be indirect financing. Joseph also mentioned that with large corporates, they can help SMEs. With the likes of TDB and many financiers, if the facility is too small, so for instance, we would not be able to reach micro organizations or operations ourselves, we then will work with or through a local bank. So provide funding to the bank to then lend to either the SMEs or the MSMEs. Another way of doing it is working together with what we call aggregators. So these can be suppliers of inputs on the agribusiness side, or they can be buyers of commodities who then can take those large facilities. And when I talk about large facilities, we're talking millions of dollars. So the 20s, the 50s, the 70 millions of dollars. And on the back of that and their relationships with that supply chain, be able to provide that funding to the rest of the supply chain. So this is another way of doing it indirectly. One is that may not come to mind to people that on the trade side, for instance, at TDB, and TDB is one of the development banks that provides both trade finance as well as project finance, is support for the importation or even the export of strategic commodities. We all know that even during this time, strategic commodities, there was still a flow of strategic commodities across countries. And so it's paramount to SMEs, for instance, to make sure that there is fuel coming into our local markets for those of us who don't produce oil, for example. It's paramount to our SMEs, and even if it's indirectly through our employees, that strategic commodities such as wheat or maize, foodstuff that countries need can still flow into the country. So there are many ways of looking at this. And I would say that the last way, the third way, I mentioned the access to markets, access to finance. The third one would be, it may feel counterintuitive at this time, but to actually focus on operational efficiencies for SMEs. This is the time to look and see how can you do things differently, better. This is the time to look at increasing capacity for financial management, because this is also linked to access to finance. It's also linked to access to markets when you're looking at bigger client bases. And it will also help to broaden client bases. And so that's the third area. And in that capacity building, I think there's an opportunity, and it's a call to all of us, whether it's in those of us in the financial industry, those of us in government, because there are a number of initiatives. We heard about the initiatives in DRC. All our countries have different initiatives. But there is an onus on government also to help raise awareness. Some people may not know that there are certain tax breaks. Many of us, when the annual budgets for countries come out, we think, okay, that's the problem for government. And it's really only large corporates that pay attention. But if governments were to also make sure, and SMEs become curious as to what's in these budgets, that's where you see where the opportunities are, where the tax breaks are, where the incentives are. And also accessibility of resources for these to be made more accessible and in a coordinated manner. So coordinated, whether it's coming from the public sector or the private sector. And this can be done by the likes of ICCs, our local chapters, can be done by the private sector, can even be done by our hosts in terms of the Global Compact, as a way of making sure that we are coordinating all these different efforts and making them known to the targets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Excellent submission. You touched on a few critical points, which is technology, which we haven't spoken a lot about in this session. But innovative ways of using technology for service delivery, from private to private, government to private, I think is really key. And thanks to technology, we're having this conference from several continents and different time zones. So I think that's really key, that we all experiment and we all try new things, given the reset button being set for all. In the areas of finance, I think there's also new innovative finance types, behavioral lending, looking at lending opportunities, or being able to support the informal sector, which is quite a sizable population in Africa. So I think technology and innovation is certainly going to play a key role in the new world as we see it evolving. You also talked about cross-border trade, import and export, looking at strategic commodities, particularly where we have protectionist measures coming in place, which we hope is only temporary, and that we can go back to open borders. I think Joseph also alluded to customs duties that are being relieved in DRC. So there's interconnection of all these aspects which need to come together to help us with the solutions that we need. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you one question. Would you say there is enough interventions for SMEs at the moment, Catherine, or do we still need, so can there be some more done to support SMEs in the area of finance? Just closing remarks on that particular topic for us. Whether there's enough being done and what more can be done to support our SMEs who form a critical portion of our population.
I smile at the question because there's never enough, right? But a lot is already being done, I think, to support SMEs across all our countries. And what would help to make this more available, readily available, is the coordination and the awareness raising. Because many of us are not aware of what the government is providing, what donors are providing, what the private sector is providing in terms of services and support to the SME sector. So there is a lot, but there's not enough awareness, and there also isn't enough capacity building to ensure that SMEs can access these resources, because many times they do come with basic conditions, not least because of accountability of whoever's providing those services to their own investors or to whoever's providing them the funding. So a lot has already been done, a lot is being done. It's about awareness raising. And what more could be done? Actually, a lot more could be done along similar lines, but also now from the provider's perspective. If we're looking at financiers, I think a lot more can be done by us as bankers to ensure that we are coming up with solutions that are tailor-made to the SME market. I know we hear this a lot, but there is an opportunity for us to understand, to better understand SMEs so that we are providing solutions that match the needs. There is an opportunity for us to broaden how we look at SMEs, not just as potential borrowers, but also potential providers of capital. In many African countries, there is a practice, if not a culture, of collective savings. And with technology these days, again, we can aggregate those savings. Whereas before, the one or two people would not have enough for us to open an account, let alone open a savings or an investment account. But if we're able to collectively aggregate these funds, we will actually find that there are adequate funds on this continent to fund not just the trade side, but also our infrastructure side. And this is another area where TDB operates, is on infrastructure and providing funding for interconnectivity, whether it is rail or it's road, providing funding for energy, and looking for solutions that are more sustainable. And in all of these, bearing in mind that SMEs are always involved along that value chain. And so we can be more deliberate if we ourselves are more aware, and we can then raise awareness. And in closing, I'd just like to point out again that SMEs are actually at the forefront of delivering on the SDGs. It's just that the average SME does not know that, right? And so there is an opportunity there as well to raise awareness of SMEs that this is what you're doing, and therefore tailor solutions to get more funding. There are funders out there who are looking for investments. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. We look forward to getting more, as Oliver Twist says, we always need more. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for being a great panelist. We're gonna now conclude with closing remarks from UN Global Compact Morocco. But before we do that, I will just have one last word from Joseph. You are the voice of SMEs. We have 2,000 participants. We have international partners. We have financiers. What would you say, if you can give us one sentence of what SMEs need and what the blueprint should look like post-COVID? And at the end of it, we'll say thank you. Before I hand over to Joseph and we go to the closing, I'd like to say thank you to our audience. Thank you for our dynamic panelists. And we all look forward to continuing the networking that we started today, and to ensure that all hands are on deck and we have a better Africa that we also desire. Over to you, Joseph, for your last words. And thank you, everyone, once again. And thank you, UN Global Compact.
Thank you, Valentina. SMEs need to survive this hard time. SMEs need to reinvent themselves, okay? And for those that are, because you said something about the informal people, that the informal market, which using a lot of workforce, we as SMEs, or as you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, that I was also the Vice VP of the National Committee of the SMEs, we need to make sure that we formalize those people that remain into informal situation. Because when the country say that we're locking down, the first thing to be hit is those that are into informal market. We need to formalize them and be a strong. We are at the gate, we are at the door. People outside get in contact, first of all, with the SMEs. So we need to make sure that we survive this time and make sure that we bring the people from the informal to formal and exist. And as said before, goal number 17, partnership. We need to work with all authorities as well as corporate, big corporate, and SMEs to go through this hard time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day. We'll pass on to the video now.
Hi. Taken individually, SMEs have less impact on the environment than larger businesses. However, SMEs represent more than 90% of all business in Africa, which means that they collectively have a significant environmental and social impact. Therefore, aligning SMEs with sustainability fundamentals is the cornerstone to fulfill the ambition for the Africa we want. While the success of the sustainability agenda is very much conditioned by SMEs, this same agenda represents emerging opportunities for their growth and survival. Historically, businesses have been able to assume that natural and social capital were free, or at least not something they were responsible for. Going forward, this is likely to change. Consumers are gradually shifting to sustainable products and are expecting the brands they buy from to tackle some of the social and environmental issues. Companies themselves are increasingly aware that damaging effects of climate change and unethical working practices on their supply chain comes with a significant cost. Such a change in expectations and perspectives opens up new opportunities for African SMEs willing to embrace sustainability to grow their businesses and increase their competitiveness in the international market. Today, SMEs might perceive sustainability as an opportunity. However, in the near future, sustainability will become a necessity for their survival. Hence, aligning the narrative of sustainable development to the SME strategic decision-making and raising their awareness on the opportunities that sustainability can bring to them is a first and essential step to help SMEs embrace sustainability. This is why, at the UN Global Compact Network Morocco and the CGEM's Commission for Business Responsibility and Citizenship, we raise business awareness on the benefit for corporate sustainability, and we help firms develop adequate skills and capabilities to be able to implement sustainability and adapt the universal environmental and social principle to local practices. Yet, following a responsible approach to doing business comes with its unique challenges. Obviously, the limited financial and human resources are the main barriers impeding the SME sustainability efforts. This is why policies and incentives from governments will play a significant role supporting SMEs in Africa overcome the barriers that impede them from embracing sustainability and will give a much needed boost to the competitiveness and inclusive growth in the continent. In conclusion, SMEs are indeed key drivers for sustainable transformation in Africa. Such transformation requires shifting from me and now to us and later mindset. Consequently, the most effective way to accelerate and reap the benefits of sustainability in our continent requires a purpose-driven systemic approach that engages stakeholders, including business, government, and members of civil society. This way, we can make sure SMEs would effectively contribute to the transformation needed in this decade for action for the Africa we want.
Sadia Ben-Ami, Board Chair of the Global Compact Network in Morocco. Thank you so much for your very important remarks, talking about some of the barriers that SMEs need to be assisted to overcome towards sustainability and resilience. And thank you as well to Valentina Minter, the Vice Chair of ICC in Ghana, and your panelists for some insightful conversations on the very critical role played by the MSME sector and how to move them from informality into formality and thus making them more sustainable and more resilient in the face of shocks such as the COVID-19 pandemic. I thank you all very much for that. And I thank you for continuing to engage with us. We're seeing what's happening here online and as well on social media. #Global Goals Local Business. So keep networking, keep meeting, keep introducing yourselves to each other, keep making those critical connections as we move towards the decade of action that is so important.